Namaste everyone and welcome to Janata Talk, the show that talks about the burning issues, and definitely we have guests and we talk about different issues that really need to be discussed. So in our today's episode, we are going to have some very useful thoughts and discussions regarding the burning issue of climate change. And for that, with us, we have Dr. Sureshs Chandra Babu, who is a Senior Research Fellow, Head of Capacity Strengthening, IFPRI, and Project Leader, CACCI Asia, and is now currently working with Government of Nepal. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you so much.
So I did the introduction from my part. Do you like to add up anything for our viewers?
Yeah, sure. First of all, let me thank Janata Talk for inviting me for the opportunity to share my ideas and thoughts with all of your viewers. I am basically an agricultural economist and policy economist working on economic research and using that research to guide the policy making process in the developing countries in the areas of agriculture, food, natural resources, nutrition, economic development in general, and also climate change.
That's a really thing. So we are today going to focus mainly on the issue of climate change, which is indeed a very serious issue to talk about, sir. So first of all, let me know something about CACCI, sir. What does it do and what's your role in this?
I am working on a program, a flagship program on comprehensive action for climate change initiative. That's what is called CACCI.
Okay, sir.
The comprehensive action for climate change initiative is primarily aimed at strengthening the capacity of the national governments, actors and players in the climate change policy arena and programmatic arena in order to translate the commitments the countries have in, we call it nationally determined contributions, national adaptation plans, to translate those policies and strategies into action on the ground and to guide the process of monitoring and tracking and verifying that back to how much progress we have made at the country level, at the regional level, and at the global level. So this is a program that helps the governments to guide their policy-oriented, evidence-based policy making in the arena of climate change, and also particularly focusing on action on the ground.
So, sir, since we're talking about climate change, what is the present scenario of this climate change issue all across the world? As of now, if you have to see from an overall perspective, what is it like?
The global level understanding of climate change, its impacts on the people's lives, its impacts on economic development, is increasingly being understood by policymakers, by the development partners. The researchers are continuing to do the research. So the issues are becoming critical because you are also seeing the shocks and the risks that people face. Take Nepal, for example. Since we are talking about Nepal, the global change in the climate change has been affecting global Nepal because it's one of the vulnerable countries. You have Himalayas,
exactly,
you have glaciers melting because of the temperature increasing, and that brings not only floods in a particular season, and in the same season you can also get drought, and that's what is happening in Gandaki province, for example, when we visited there. So it is not just a global issue, it is also affecting the local livelihoods, local farmers, local communities, local landscapes, because it has such an implication for the impact itself. The climate change itself will have impact on each and every individual. So that is why it's becoming very important. But what is more important is to how do we understand the phenomena, to prepare the communities to face the changes, to make them resilient, to make them understand how they can change, say, cropping patterns or working patterns, livelihoods, so that they can adapt to the situation. At the same time, use that adaptation measures to also reduce the future impact of our activities in agriculture, food systems, food loss and waste, in order to reduce the effect of what we do on climate change. So both adaptation and mitigation are very important as we go along.
That's great, sir. So let us talk about the link between this global warming issues, like when it is linked with the climate change. How do we link these things together?
Yes, so the global warming, countries are taking it seriously because it is directly affecting their production systems. When the farmers lose their crops, That's basically reducing the agricultural, GDP, agricultural income of the country. When the agricultural income of the country goes down, when the country's economic development depends on agriculture, like Nepal for the most part, and the people depend on agriculture for their livelihoods, you are having a serious problem of the growth itself pulled back for several years. So not only you are worried about what will happen to your production systems, but also you are concerned about how those reductions in the yields, in the productivity of the people will affect your economic growth. That's why it becomes very important from that perspective. But more importantly, from the protection of lives, livelihoods, and improving the conditions of welfare conditions of the people, and reducing the poverty goals, reducing food insecurity, reducing malnutrition, will also impinge on how we tackle climate change as a problem, as an economic development problem. That's why we can't just jump on climate change on the one hand and forget the poverty reduction problems.
Exactly, sir.
But we have to address them collectively. And that's a challenge for the governments. And that's where evidence-based policy making comes in. That's where capacity of the national systems to respond to the climatic conditions are important.
So how can we, what can we consider a part of different factors that you discussed about? What are the sole contributing factor for climate change in the present scenario?
Climate change is again global phenomena, but it affects locally specific production systems. And as we see in say Kentucky province or Madhya province, and you contrast that, the hilly region versus Terai region in Nepal, the impacts are different. Mainly because one region depends on the water, other region depends on the rainfall, water from the rivers, for example, rainfall. So the context-specific solutions are important. While we broadly know what impact climate change has on crops, crop production, the livelihoods and migration of the people, and the energy conditions of the country, and because if the country is dependent on hydroelectric power, if the water is not there flowing in the rivers, even the clean energy will not be there. So in that context, you need to address the problem at the national level, policy making level, strategy development level, in relation to the nationally determined contributions, what the goals that we set for ourselves at the national level, and bring it back to the local level. What can we do? Unless things happen at the local level, we cannot make progress.
Exactly.
So you have to understand both the local conditions, locally context-specific solutions, and bring it back, the achievements, back to the national level contributions to climate change problems.
So now let's drive our focus towards your contribution to Nepal. What activities you're focused on? You're talking about the Gandagi project. Apart of that, what are your sole responsibilities, or what have you been doing so far, sir?
On the one hand, we are looking at how Nepal economic development process, you are having the strategies, the national development plans, even budget allocations, how are this going to have climate related benefits, right? That's one broad macro level approach. You need to understand that before you go to the next level. The next level is, what are the regulatory systems in place? What are the institutions that are contributing to climate change that can be improved upon? And how these institutions can be strengthened to address not only the immediate emergency kind of climate change issues, but also long-term solutions. That's the second stage. The third stage, you have to go to provincial level and the local administration level, taking Nepal as a context. And because things are happening at that level, you have decentralized your system of implementing programs, which means that we have to work at the provincial level at least. So what we do at the provincial level, for example, we have started already working with local institutions like IIDS and collaborating with them in terms of developing a provincial level development plan that is also climate resilient. So that exercise is going on. We are learning from that exercise, and we can use that lessons for other provinces as well. But on the other hand, you also have to directly address the farmers' needs and farmers' behavioral change. Now, to give an example, this trip that I am here, we are looking at, with the Ministry of Agriculture, we have looked at what are the conditions under which farmers are producing their crop, what is the condition under which farmers are storing their commodities, what are the challenges that they face in terms of the food loss and waste. See, for example, up to 30 to 35% of the food that is produced is wasted, or they are lost before it reaches the consumer, or even after reaching the consumers.
Indeed.
What does that mean? That means that your food security can be improved if you save those food and manage the waste. You can actually change the situation around in terms of producing 30% more food. So you don't have to spend that resources, water resources, land resources, chemical fertilizers that go into production can be saved. Or turn it around, you can produce more, 30% more that is available for addressing the food security and nutrition. But in that context, the food that is lost and waste can also create climatic impact in terms of when you dump it and they produce methane, for example. This is greenhouse gases that actually is released to the air and which is actually affecting the environment, contributing to the climate change. So you can also address the food loss and waste, which we are addressing this week. We have been conducting national consultations, right, with the support of USAID and the Comprehensive Action for Climate Change Program, Cacci, that I mentioned. So we have had a national consultation with the government minister came and inaugurated that, the joint secretaries, public sector institutions, private sector institutions, and also the NGOs that are operating on the ground, farmers associations, livestock associations, and processing industries, for example. And they all came together, talked about it, what are the immediate opportunities to reduce food loss and waste, so that we can also have food security, nutrition, livelihood, climate change benefits.
That's great, sir. So, like being here at Nepal and studying the scenario, people are yet not clear about the concept of climate change. You have been dealing with different places, different people for sure. So, what do you think should be done for people to know about these serious issues? Because it's up to the people, they should have the issue addressed first, but that's not happening in the present scenario.
Yeah.
So, what is Cacci doing for that?
Yeah. We know that awareness about the climate change, we see that change is happening. We see the floods, which the other things that are happening in terms of climate-induced shocks that we call. But we know it's happening, but the actors and players like the farmers, for the consumers, they themselves do not get that awareness.
Exactly, that's the major issue.
So I'm glad that Janata TV invited me to talk, because this is one opportunity for me to give that awareness.
And we're going to do that. We're going to let people, our viewers, know about that serious issue.
Yeah, exactly.
So please let's do that, sir.
Yeah. So in the context of consumers, producers, and in the middle, you have people who are trading, people who are translating, they transporting the products from the farm to the consumers. They all have a role to play. In the farm level, we have to make awareness among the farmers that, although price fluctuations make them leave the commodity in the field, and that becomes a waste, for example, or loss for them. And how do we encourage them, change their behavior through incentives, through mechanisms for storage, for example, guide them in the process of making sure that not a single grain of food or any vegetables, fruits are wasted in the farm, right? That we have to work together with the extension system, with the ministries of agriculture in the provincial level and at the national level. So that's one level of awareness. The second level of awareness is the traders and marketing agents who carry the products, who transport the products. They should be educated in terms of how do they do that cold storage and save the food that they are handling, and so that their behavior can be changed in terms of enhancing the benefit of what is being produced and reducing the loss that comes along in the transportation. And then on the consumer side, consumers either eat at home or they go to the hotels and restaurants and eat. In both the sources, we are losing food because I see the restaurants, 1/3 of the food is left on the plate, and they are all dumped. And that has huge effect on climate change because of the greenhouse gases that can come out of it, because waste is not managed properly. So the waste management is a big awareness. How do we dispose it? How do we recycle that? How do we actually bring it back in the form of compost and organic manure back to the farm, so that we can utilize it effectively, not lose any of that we produce, right? So either we save, or what is being wasted can be converted into next generation of fertilizer, organic fertilizer, back to the farm. So all these require awareness, all these require understanding of what we can do with what we have. This is all resource management to come to the basic point. How do we manage the limited resources that we have, at the same time benefit all the actors and players along the continuum of production to the consumers and beyond, right?
That's great, sir.
So awareness is very important.
And exactly. So that is what we are doing today. So impact of climate change is seen in a form of forest fire as of now. as you said, methane production. In Nepal, what in other forms can climate change be felt, or like whatever? What is your observation regarding that?
Yeah, the immediate observation for me is the erratic rainfall that comes and that increases the flow of water in river that we are not really planned, and it breaks the banks of the river and the water flows into the villages and destroys the crops. That's an immediate observation. It's happening. And when you have this we call it crop emergencies, what are the plans that we can put in place in order for the farmers to adapt? That's very important. And how can we effectively save the resources in terms of water resources when it's excessive water going on in the rivers, and in terms of water harvesting technologies, and save it for the next season, for example. And that's one immediate response in terms of adaptation. We can also adapt in terms of changing our cropping pattern. For example, if you are growing rice in a flooded condition, and that creates methane, and can we do rice cultivation in a fashion that rice is not grown in the stagnated water, right? It could be direct sowing rice or alternative wetting and drying of the rice fields, so that methane reduction can happen. This immediately we can do, and it's a mitigation opportunity. And in addition to that, we also see drought. Increasingly unpredictable rainfall creates drought conditions. And if you talk about Terai region in Nepal, you plant expecting rains will come, and the rains are not coming. So how do we use technologies like micro irrigation, for example? Save water in a season where water is excessive.
Great.
And do micro irrigation in the season where water is scarce. And that planning and adaptation can be a good response for managing the erratic rainfall, managing the shocks that we face due to climate change.
And what is the present scenario or situation of Nepal taking all these technology for maintaining or balancing the serious issue caused because of the climate change? What do you have to say on that?
Yeah, the technology innovations are there. We need to continue to invest in research. Investment in research in Nepal is not optimal, partly because of we have to increase it. And other countries, if you take China, for example, India, for example, they are large countries, but still they are able to invest a larger portion of their agricultural income in research and investment. That's a fundamental starting point, because we need to identify context-specific technologies, locality-specific technologies that can solve people's problems. That requires research. That requires action research. That requires investment. That's number one. Then we need to strengthen the institutions to respond to that. Research institutions, extension institutions, farmers' organizations, private sector, in agri-businesses. How do we strengthen those institutions to respond to the climate change? That's number two. And then at the farm level, how do we strengthen the extension system in order to guide the farmers, locality-specific advice and investment opportunities at that level, so that they can change and adapt to the climate change scenarios. At the same time, not only earn good income, reduce the impact of climate change on their livelihoods, but increase the productivity, increase their food security and nutrition situation. And it should be inclusive of youth, women, and other vulnerable groups in the ethnic groups, for example, in the rural areas. So that's the kind of large strategy, but how do we translate that at provincial, local government level? We need to work at that level.
So now let's divert our talk towards the economic boost.
Yes.
So what possibilities do you see in Nepal regarding the economy and economic boost? What's the present scenario that you have observed? What do you have to say about it?
Oh, that's a very good question. It's a broad question. And to start with, Nepal is ideally located geographically.
Exactly.
In the north, you have China. It's 1.45 whatever billion people in demand sense. Similar kind of demand is in your south, in India. And of course, you have been doing trade with both the countries. And we need to look at trade as an opportunity, even in the context of climate change. What are the opportunities there to think about for changing the cropping pattern in order to take advantage of this geographical situation that you are in. And you are also having tourism as a major industry. How do we facilitate that tourism? That's already going on, and people come here as another source of economic development for you. And of course, you cannot just rely on tourism, and you saw that COVID example,
Exactly.
and we just couldn't manage it. So how do we strengthen the systems at the local level so that people, farmers, for example, rural livelihoods can be managed with the policies and programs that help them to adapt to the climate change? and contribute to economic development. That still that work has to be done. If you don't do the investment on the ground, in the rural areas, in remote areas, people, as we know in Nepal, the young people leave. Either they leave to urban cities, urban centers, or they live outside the country, because everyone is looking for opportunities.
Exactly.
So how do we translate this economic transformation, the food system transformation, the agricultural transformation, that can keep the rural youth in rural areas, so they can contribute to the economic development of the rural areas, is how we should be thinking about right now.
Okay, so let's link climate change with economy now. How are these two things related or correlated with each other?
Like I said, environment changes in the rural areas, climate change difficulties in rural areas to manage their agriculture, for example, will drive the immigration or immigration process. People will leave the country, and which is in a way good, because they can bring the income back, but there is no labor in the agriculture sector. When agriculture is a significant sector for economic development and employment and livelihoods in rural areas, and the labor force that is leaving from agriculture, economic growth is going to be immediately affected. And that leaving may be what we call environmental migration, because climate change brings uncertainty in the agriculture, and uncertainty in agriculture drives the people to urban areas and outside the countries. It's a direct cause. And economy cannot develop if we don't develop agriculture. That we know. So it's one pathway that I'm explaining. There are several pathways we can explain. Tourism is another industry. If it affects the climate change also, right? If you don't keep the beautiful glaciers there and it melts, and tourism is going to go down. When the tourism goes down, you're not going to have the income that comes from tourism. That's directly affecting the economic growth. Particularly for countries like Sri Lanka and Nepal, depends on the tourism, right? So you got to be strategically looking at what are the sources of economic growth, what are the sources of economic development, what are the sources of poverty reduction and malnutrition reduction and food security improvement, and address those sources, so that in terms of adapting to climate change and mitigating to climate change, so that those sectors continue to contribute, continue to drive economic development in the country.
So we are almost towards the end of our show. So let's just sum up these session of the day with your future further plannings for the same, sir. What are your upcoming plans?
In the Cacci program that we are taking, the immediate need is to create awareness. We talked about awareness of the food saved is food produced, and how much we can get the message out in terms of food loss and waste, and how can we provide opportunities, economic opportunities and institutional opportunities and policy kind of environment for people to save as much food as possible from the consumer, from the producer to the consumer and beyond, right? The processing industries and agribusiness industries have to be guided in that process as well. That's a key message that we will be taking to the farmers in terms of awareness. But also in the context of the climate change and the food loss and waste, how can we take these goals of reducing food loss and waste into the nationally determined contributions and make it a national goal, and actually document the progress we make and report it to the global commitments that we have made. And that's the next step we'll be doing. But in that process, the importance of capacity strengthening the institutions, strengthening the policy processes, and strengthening the evidence-based policy making process is fundamental. We cannot underestimate that goal, and we will be working towards that.
So all the best for you, all the upcoming ventures. Glad to have you in the show. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, with this, we come to the end of our today's episode. I hope this episode was fruitful enough for you all. We'll be coming up with regular such episodes in days ahead as well. Thank you so much for your time. Keep watching Janata Television.